Chapter 1. The Darkness Within Us. The small town of Arthavon nestled along the windswept cliffs of the Cornish coastline, gazing over the vast, restless Atlantic Ocean. The sun blazed above, casting a golden haze that wrapped the town in a fleeting warmth. For now, in the height of summer, the village hummed with a semblance of life. The streets, usually eerily quiet, were now alive with the steady flow of muggles who had descended from all corners of the United Kingdom. These visitors, known as tourists, had come to catch a glimpse of the ancient Tintagel castle that was deeply tied with the Arthurian legend. But this influx of outsiders only highlighted the true fragility of the pulse of the town. It was as if the tourists were breathing temporary life into a village that had long been in decline, an illusion of vibrancy, of sunshine that would immediately fade away and vanish the very moment when the summer faded. Serafina despised it all, the town, the time, and most of all, her godmother. Serafina felt so restrained during this season, constantly under surveillance. It was suffocating being kept inside nearly all day with her every move watched. The rare moments she was allowed outside were always under the vigilant eye of their house elf, Renki. It was maddening. She had these episodes, moments when she lost control of herself, when everything and everyone became a target, something to use, to harm, to dominate. A hunger for pain, for chaos, would overtake her. Her godmother told her to conceal it, to control it, but Serafina was ashamed of that part of her, the darker, uncontrollable side. She would spend hours in the bathroom after such episodes, retching into the toilet, the weakness, the shame. It gnawed at her, and it had only worsened since she was 10 years old. She often stared into the mirror, gazing at the girl with bright blue eyes and jet black hair who stared back at her. "Why am I like this?" she would whisper to the reflection, pressing her trembling hand against the glass. Loneliness was her constant companion. Often in the quiet of the backyard, Serafina would try to suppress it, but it felt like struggling against quicksand, a doomed battle that always ended in defeat. The emptiness would creep in, suffocating her from the inside out. Her godmother was rarely home, consumed by her demanding duties as an auror at the Ministry of Magic, a world Serafina had been denied, a world her godmother insisted she could never be a part of. Serafina knew that she belonged to no world. The Muggle world was ever-changing, ever-growing, and too dangerous for her. Meanwhile, she was told she was too dangerous for the wizarding world. Her godmother had made that painfully clear when she had burned all of Serafina's Hogwarts letters in the fire. And when the next one arrived, her godmother sent a personal response, refusing her admittance. A few days later, a tall, elderly man appeared. His arrival was solemn, his presence imposing. He had spent over an hour behind closed doors with her godmother, but Serafina was not invited to that conversation. And when she asked about the man, her godmother dismissed them and sent her to her room without further explanation. Back then she had been 10 years old. Soon, only July the 28th, she would turn 13. And yet, despite the passing years, her life had remained stubbornly unchanged. Now she stood in the backyard, leaning against the fence, her sharp blue eyes fixed upon the endless expanse of the ocean. The salty breeze tugged at her hair, and for a short moment she felt almost free. Almost. "Miss Serafina," Renki's nervous voice piped up from behind her. "You shouldn't be outside for too long. Mistress says—" "I don't care what she says," Serafina snapped, her voice sharp as the wind. She didn't even glance at him. Renki shifted uncomfortably, his spindly arms wringing his oversized sweater. "Miss, it's not safe." Safe. That word sent a surge of anger through her, hot, rotten and bitter. They were always talking about safety, keeping her safe, keeping the world safe from her. With a heavy sigh, she turned away from the fence and followed Renki back inside, her footsteps heavy. She didn't speak another word that day, nor did she leave her room. She spent all of her time staring at the walls painted a dull grey colour. Even her own room was a source of depression. Suddenly, a soft knock sounded at the door. Serafina didn't move, didn't react. She already knew that it was Renki. "Miss Serafina?" Renki's voice was as shaky and quiet as always. "What is it?" she asked flatly, her gaze still fixed on the walls. "Mistress has returned. She wishes to speak with you." Serafina's stomach twisted. It wasn't unusual for her godmother to summon her, but it rarely meant anything good. With a sigh, she stood, straightening her clothes as she walked to the door. Renki shuffled aside as she stepped into the hallway, his large bat-like ears twitching nervously as if he feared that Serafina would cause him harm. As Serafina stepped into the sitting room, she found her godmother, the famous Nerissa Daka, waiting for her in the sitting room. "Sit," Nerissa said curtly, not bothering to look up from the stack of parchment in her hands. Reluctantly, Serafina obeyed, sinking into the chair across from her. For a moment, silence filled the room. Nerissa's sharp green eyes finally lifted, pinning Serafina in place. "You've been outside again," Nerissa said, her tone devoid of warmth. Serafina bristled. "I wasn't gone long." "That's not the point," Nerissa replied, her voice calm but firm. "You know the rules, Serafina. I didn't raise a fool." Serafina stiffened, her hands gripping the chair. "You say that like I'm a child. A child who can't think of herself," she shot back, her tone sharper than she intended. Nerissa's eyes flashed with a brief flicker of annoyance, but she remained composed, her fingers lightly trapping the edge of the parchment she held. "I am treating you like a child, Serafina, because that's exactly what you are. You are only 13 and you have no grasp or idea of the things in this world. Things that will tear you apart if you don't approach them with care." Nerissa's voice was firm, her words slicing through the tension in the room like a blade. Serafina's face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation, but she forced herself to stay quiet, her fists clenched at her sides. She wasn't a child. She wasn't. "Don't look at me like that," Nerissa continued, her voice lowering but never losing its sharpness. "I know you want more, but you're not ready. The world outside won't care about you, Serafina. It will swallow you whole if you aren't careful." "And how do you know that?" Serafina challenged, her voice as toxic as poison. "You've never given me a chance. All you've ever done is isolate me from the world, lock me away in this house like some sort of prisoner." Nerissa's expression hardened, her gaze never leaving Serafina's. "Do you think I've chosen this for you out of some personal cruelty?" she said, her voice quiet. "I've kept you away because it was the only way to keep you safe." Serafina's chest heaved with the force of her anger, but she refused to back down. "Safe?" she repeated bitterly. "From what? From myself?" She laughed almost manically. "You don't trust me. You never have. You don't believe in me. All you've ever done is treat me like I'm dangerous. Like I'm a bomb waiting to explode." Nerissa's expressions darkened. "You are a bomb. You always have been." Her voice was sharp, cutting through the tension in the room. "You don't realize it, Serafina, but there's a darkness in you, something you haven't learned to control. And it scares me. It scares me because I've seen what happens when that kind of power is left unchecked." Serafina's heart hammered in her chest. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to speak through it. "I'm not a bomb. I'm no monster," Serafina spat, her voice trembling with the effort to hold back tears. I'm just me. I'm trying to figure this out, figure myself out. But you haven't given me that chance to learn, to prove to you that I can do it, to prove that I'm not the monster that you think I am." Nerissa stood still, looking at Serafina, her expression as unreadable and still as always. But then she suddenly shook her head. "No," Nerissa simply replied, her voice hollow. And that wasn't the answer Serafina had hoped for. "What do you mean by no?" she asked, deeply confused. For a moment she had thought that she could change her mind. And with that, Serafina stormed out of the sitting room, her body trembling with a combination of anger and frustration. Her hands clutched at her sides, her fingers curling into tight fists. Her heart pounded, and the familiar hunger swelled inside her. She didn't want this. She didn't want to be this. She made it halfway down the hallway before she heard Nerissa's voice, calm and collected, calling her name. Seraphina. That one word, the sound of her name, so calm, so sure, triggered something deep within her. The anger, the pain, the feeling of being trapped, it all built up inside her like an inferno. She didn't know what she was doing until it was already too late. Just leave me alone, she screamed, without realizing it herself. A blast of force erupted from her, an invisible wave of magic that slammed into the walls, rattling the pictures, making them fall off the walls. Bookshelves fell and the floor shook beneath her own feet. Nerissa was as well swung towards the walls, but had managed to ease her fall with a quick spell, her breath ragged as she fell to her knees. You... Seraphina's voice trembled, barely above a whisper as she slowly looked up to face her godmother. I didn't mean to. But Nerissa's expression was no longer one of anger or concern. It was something else, something more unsettling. Sadness. I thought that I could teach you. Perhaps I was wrong, she stated, her tone as cold as ice. I don't want to be this way, she said. I don't want to hurt anyone. I don't know how to stop it. There was a long silence between them. You need help, Seraphina, Nerissa said quietly. Real help. And I can't give you that. I thought I could, but I can't. Seraphina's heart sank at the finality of her words. She felt like a failure, like she had let her godmother down. Then what? What should I do? Nerissa stood silently for a moment, her sharp green eyes studying Seraphina carefully. I don't know, but you can't stay here. You can't stay under my roof like this. Not until you learn to control yourself. You're sending me away, aren't you? Seraphina's voice trembling with a sting of betrayal. Nerissa stepped back, her face hardening once more. If I thought you were ready, I would have sent you to a proper school. But you're not. And until you are, you need to be somewhere that can help you. Somewhere that understands what you're becoming. You're sending me to some kind of facility? Seraphina asked, the disgust and fear creeping into her voice. Nerissa didn't answer directly. She simply turned away from her as she covered herself with the hood of the black robes. It's for your own good, Seraphina, Nerissa said softly. She then snapped her fingers and Renki appeared immediately with a loud crack and bowed immediately. I'll be gone for a few hours, Renki. Keep an eye on her. Make sure she is packed for tomorrow, Nerissa informed, her back still turned to Seraphina. Of course, Mistress Dacre, Renki bowed low. Not another word was spoken as Nerissa left, storming down the hallway, and Seraphina had never felt more alone.